The judge tapped his pen lightly on the table, his eyes scanning the file before him. The courtroom was steeped in tension. A heavy silence filled the room, broken only by the soft rustle of paper. Finally, he leaned back in his chair, a cryptic smile playing on his lips. "Elon Musk," he spoke, his tone calm but laced with irony. "They say you're a genius, a dreamer. But today, I wonder, do you still believe in your dreams?" On the prosecution side, the lawyer raised an eyebrow, his eyes gleaming with confidence. With the evidence in hand, he was sure this trial would be nothing short of a public statement, that even the most powerful could not stand above the law. Below, the audience was packed. Journalists scribbled intently, camera flashes lighting up the room, as no one wanted to miss a single moment. Whispers filled the air, and eager eyes were all focused on the defendant. Yet, Musk remained silent. He leaned back in his chair, hands folded across his chest, his expression unreadable, as though he were simply observing a game of chess. There was no sign of distress, nor any hint of anxiety. The judge raised an eyebrow, amused by Musk's response. "Mr. Musk," he continued, his voice low but clear, "this is not a speech on a stage, nor a debate on social media. Here, there is only the truth and the cold, hard letters of the law." A few quiet chuckles echoed from a corner of the room. The prosecutor glanced at Musk, waiting for a reaction, but Musk only slowly lifted his gaze, calmly locking eyes with the judge. And then, he spoke. Just one sentence. The courtroom fell into complete silence. The smile on the prosecutor's face vanished. The judge's brow furrowed slightly. No one could have predicted what was about to happen. The prosecutor took a deep breath, adjusted his stance, and then slowly walked toward the jury. When he spoke, his voice rang out, confident and firm. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today because a man believes that power can bend the law to his will." He turned, his gaze fixed on the judge. "There is no need for further debate. The evidence is undeniable. Musk and his company have repeatedly ignored regulations, bypassed procedures, and disregarded the principles set in place to protect everyone." The judge slowly nodded, his expression revealing little emotion. "Mr. Musk, I trust you understand the gravity of what is unfolding here." Musk did not rush to respond. He simply tilted his head, his sharp gaze sweeping across the room. No one spoke. The prosecutor flipped through the files, their voice growing more assured with each word. "Your Honor, this is not just a matter concerning an individual or a corporation. This is an undeniable truth, that no matter how great one may be, no one is above the law." The atmosphere in the courtroom seemed to waver, as whispers spread from one person to the next, creating a low hum of murmurs. The judge quietly observed the man standing before him, a glint of amusement in his eyes. He leaned back in his chair, arms crossed, then spoke slowly. "Mr. Musk, should I assume you wish to represent yourself? Or should we explain some basic legal principles to ensure you understand the situation?" Laughter erupted, and a few people in the gallery shook their heads as if watching a comedy. Elon Musk remained still, his expression unreadable. Under the glaring lights of the courtroom, he appeared unshaken. The prosecutor seized the moment, stepping forward with a sharp tone. "Your Honor, it's clear the defendant views this as some sort of joke. Perhaps he's used to stirring up public opinion on social media to avoid dealing with the real issues. But today, we're not discussing stories crafted online, we're dealing with undeniable facts." Some members of the jury exchanged glances, seemingly convinced that this case was a foregone conclusion. The judge gently tapped his fingers on the armrest, nodding as though contemplating something. Then, he tilted his head, a half-smile forming at the corner of his mouth. "Fascinating. I too am curious. Mr. Musk, are you here today to defend yourself? Or simply to deliver another public performance?" Another round of laughter followed. The prosecutor cleared his throat, turning his gaze back toward the judge. "Your Honor, based on all that's been presented, I suggest we proceed with the necessary steps without further delay." The judge nodded, slowly lifting his gavel, then suddenly paused. "Mr. Musk, if you have anything to say, now would be the time. Otherwise, I fear there may be no opportunity left." The room fell silent. Musk finally made a move. He took a slow breath, as if savoring every moment before speaking. Then he stood up, adjusting the hem of his coat, his demeanor unsettlingly calm. He stepped forward, facing the judge, his eyes gleaming with an unpredictable coldness. His voice rang out, unwavering. "Your Honor, first of all, I would like to thank the prosecutor for the dramatic presentation just now. Truly, if this were a public speaking competition, I think they did quite well." Murmurs immediately erupted, this time with an entirely different tone. The judge briefly squinted, his initial amusement shifting to a deeply contemplative gaze. The atmosphere in the room changed. What Elon Musk was about to say could shift everything. Musk moved slowly across the room, his gaze sweeping over each person. His voice was calm, yet sharply cutting. "We always hear about rules, regulations, about how I'm said to have challenged the system. But has anyone ever wondered whether that system was truly fair to begin with?" The judge raised an eyebrow, flipping through a file on the desk. The room was so silent that you could hear the faint sound of a pen gliding across paper in the far corner. A smile briefly appeared on his face. Elon Musk, a man who thinks he can rewrite the law to his own liking. His voice carried, dripping with sarcasm. The prosecutor chuckled softly, his eyes gleaming with confidence. To him, today was just another public spectacle where Musk couldn't escape the grasp of the law. The rows of spectators were packed. Camera flashes went off incessantly, and reporters scribbled non-stop. Most people had already made up their minds about the outcome. But Musk showed no emotion. He quietly leaned back in his chair, his arms crossed, his gaze serene. The judge stared at him intently, seemingly intrigued by this silence. "Musk, I hope you're ready. This is not a debate on social media. This is a real court proceeding." A burst of laughter erupted from the audience. But Musk remained calm, unaffected. Then he spoke, his voice freezing the entire room. The laughter immediately stopped. The prosecutor briefly frowned, his self-assured smile fading. Even the judge paused for a moment. The prosecutor adjusted his tie and took a few steps closer to the jury. His voice clear and heavy. "Ladies and gentlemen, we are here today because one individual believes he stands above everyone else." He turned, slowly looking toward the judge, his gaze full of meaning. "The evidence before us is irrefutable. Mr. Musk's company has grossly violated regulations, disregarded the law, and granted itself the privilege of standing outside the rules that everyone else must follow." The judge nodded slightly, his gaze scrutinizing. "Mr. Musk, I believe you understand the consequences of these charges." Musk tilted his head slightly, but remained silent. The prosecutor flipped through the file in his hand, his voice sharp. "Your Honor, this is not just a corporate lawsuit. This is a full-on challenge to the legal system. Mr. Musk has become famous for breaking all boundaries. But today, he faces a boundary that cannot be broken: justice." A wave of murmurs spread across the courtroom. The judge leaned back in his chair, his gaze thoughtful. "Mr. Musk, do you wish to defend yourself? Or would you like me to explain the legal terms first?" Laughter rang out across the courtroom. Some jurors shook their heads, while a few exchanged knowing glances. Elon Musk remained seated, expressionless, his gaze fixed forward as if the entire noisy scene had nothing to do with him. The prosecutor seized the moment, stepping forward, his voice echoing throughout the room. "Your Honor, it seems the defendant does not take this trial seriously. Perhaps he thinks that with just a social media post, he can turn the tide. But let it be clear that here, we do not judge based on status updates or polls. Here, we only care about the truth." The judge leaned back in his chair, tapping lightly on the desk, his eyes gleaming with amusement. "Well then, Mr. Musk, I'm wondering if you have a real defense. Or if we're just sitting here waiting to see what trick you'll pull next." Laughter erupted again, this time louder than before. The prosecutor turned back, looking directly at the judge with utter confidence. "Your Honor, I suggest we reach a conclusion soon, as the evidence is overwhelmingly clear." The judge nodded, taking his gavel and lightly tapping it. "Mr. Musk, if you have anything to say in your defense, this is your last opportunity." A moment of silence enveloped the room. Then, for the first time since the trial began, Musk moved. He gently adjusted his collar, stood up with absolute calm. No haste, no confusion. All eyes turned to him. He stepped forward, looking across the room, then slowly began to speak. "Quite interesting," he said, his voice warm but tinged with challenge. "I see today is not just a trial, but a performance, and I must say, The prosecution has done quite well in their role." Below, there were murmurs. A few people tilted their heads, waiting to hear what Musk would say next. The smile on the judge's face slowly faded. Musk took a step forward, his gaze becoming sharper. "We've heard many accusations, many arguments about what I'm alleged to have done wrong. But the one question no one is asking is, was this system truly fair from the start?" The prosecutor crossed his arms, looking at Musk with a challenging expression. "So this is your defense? You're saying the law has no value?" Musk paused, slowly turning to face the prosecutor directly. His voice was no longer mocking, but sharp as a blade. "No, I'm not saying the law has no value. I'm saying you were wrong to think you understand it." The courtroom suddenly went silent. One juror leaned forward, another pursed their lips, their gaze clearly curious. Musk looked around, then continued, each word clear and decisive. "And today, I'm going to show you that." The judge clasped his hands in front of him, his gaze contemplative as he followed the developments of the trial. Musk slowly picked up the file, flipping through its pages as though searching for something important. After a brief pause, he looked up, his voice low but firm. "We're having a lawsuit based on the assumption that my company broke the law. But I have a simple question. Which law?" He raised a document high, flipping to a marked section. This regulation was drafted decades ago, when the industry was still operating in an entirely different way. Outdated structure, loose wording, and most importantly, he set the file down, his finger lightly touching a line of text. "It contradicts itself." The prosecution shifted slightly. Some jurors exchanged glances. "Objection," the prosecutor snapped. "The law is the law, and it applies to everyone." Musk tilted his head, his gaze sharp. "Oh? So if I follow every single clause in this law," he turned to another page, speaking calmly, "my company would simultaneously violate another federal regulation." The room fell silent for a second. "Which law should I follow?" Musk looked straight at the judge. "The one that's outdated and no longer relevant? Or the one that contradicts it?" The judge lifted his glasses, slowly flipping through the document. His expression began to change. Musk stepped forward, his voice steady but strong. "The law cannot exist if it's not consistent with itself. Would a lawsuit based on outdated and contradictory clauses even be valid?" The jury began to murmur. The atmosphere in the courtroom seemed to shift. Musk pushed a marked page towards the judge. "Clause 52.3. The judge glanced over, his gaze growing even sharper. The prosecutor hurriedly flipped through his files. Musk stepped back, letting the silence envelop the room. Then he spoke, clearly and slowly. "This law was drafted before the internet became an essential part of the world." A wave of murmurs rose. The judge furrowed his brow. The prosecutor opened his mouth to object, but paused. The tension in the room was palpable. With every breath echoing, Musk folded his arms, his eyes as sharp as blades. He didn't need to raise his voice, his calmness was enough to make the room tense. "Your Honor." His voice was low but clear, resonating through the courtroom. "Please tell me, are we here today to uphold justice? Or are we simply trying to bind innovation with outdated rules?" The prosecutor jumped, hurriedly flipping through the stack of documents in front of him as if searching for a reasonable answer. That's not, I mean." Musk tilted his head, a smile playing on his lips. Not the smile of satisfaction, but the one of someone who had completely turned the tables. The judge placed his pen down on the table, his gaze suddenly sharp. At first, he had thought this was just a simple lawsuit, a wealthy entrepreneur trying to bend the law to escape responsibility. But now, he was no longer sure. Musk flipped a page of the document on the table, his voice steady yet powerful. "We're not just talking about a specific law. We're talking about the unity within the legal system. If one rule is enforced, but another is overlooked because it doesn't fit the situation, then that's not justice. That's bias." The prosecutor furrowed his brow, clenching his fists. "Objection. He's intentionally exploiting a legal loophole." Musk turned to look at him directly, his gaze calm yet razor sharp. "You're talking about the loopholes that this very lawsuit is based on to accuse me, aren't you?" He tilted his head slowly. "Quite ironic, isn't it?" The room fell into a heavy silence. No one dared to breathe loudly. The judge no longer sat back comfortably in his chair. Now he leaned forward, his gaze focused. The initial confidence had vanished. Musk continued, his voice steady as if every word had been carefully calculated in advance. Let's consider the precedent. In the case of Smith vs. VTech Corp., this court ruled that no company could be punished simply for operating in an area not covered by the law. This very court made that decision. The judge blinked slowly. He remembered that case, and he knew the prosecutor did as well. Musk calmly set the document down. His eyes locked onto the judge. So, Your Honor, is this trial truly about upholding justice? Or is it simply a way to strangle development because it doesn't fit old principles? The entire courtroom was as still as death. The prosecutor quickly flipped through the pages of the documents. But there was no longer any confidence in his eyes. The arguments he had prepared had been completely dismantled. The judge looked at Musk. For the first time with genuine respect. And for the first time, he was no longer certain who was truly in control of the room. Musk stood upright, his hands lightly clasped in front of his chest, his sharp gaze sweeping across the courtroom. His voice was steady but carried an undeniable weight. Your Honor, he spoke, each word seemingly carefully chosen. Are we truly protecting justice? Or are we merely using outdated principles to hinder the progress of the future? The prosecutor blinked, his hand tightening around his pen. He quickly flipped through the pages, as if searching for a clause that could turn the tide. That's not entirely accurate. Musk tilted his head slightly, showing no sign of haste. But in his eyes, there was a certainty that made the entire room feel as though it had come to a standstill. The judge let go of the documents in his hands, his gaze no longer just one of observation. He was weighing, rethinking the entire picture he had thought he understood. Musk continued, his voice unwavering. He wasn't arguing, he was posing a question that compelled everyone to reflect. A legal system is only valuable when it maintains consistency. If today we apply one clause but ignore another simply because it doesn't align with pre-existing views, then that's not justice, it's imposition. The prosecutor nearly jumped to his feet. Objection. He's merely exploiting a loophole in the law. Musk slowly turned, his gaze calm but sharp. What about your case? Isn't it based on a similar loophole? He paused, a slight smirk forming on his lips. Strange, isn't it? Silence enveloped the courtroom. The judge, who had previously been reclining in his chair with an air of contemplation, now leaned forward. The initial confidence in his eyes had been replaced with a deeper, more thoughtful look. Musk didn't let the opportunity slip away. He lightly flipped a page in front of him, his voice still calm but carrying an undeniable gravity. Let's consider a past case, he said, his eyes fixed directly on the judge. In the case of Smith vs. VTech Corp., this very court ruled that a company could not be penalized when operating in a field not yet addressed by the law. That became precedent. The judge furrowed his brow. He remembered that case, and more importantly, the prosecutor remembered too. Musk looked directly at him, his gaze unflinching. So, Your Honor, is this trial truly seeking justice, or is it merely trying to defend a system that has failed to keep pace with the times? The room was silent. The prosecutor quickly flipped through the documents in front of him, but it seemed he could no longer find any solid ground to stand on. The judge did not respond immediately. For the first time in this trial, he no longer viewed Musk as a businessman trying to exploit the law, but as someone raising a question that even he could not easily dismiss. The prosecutor clenched the stack of documents in his hand and quickly walked to the center of the courtroom. His face showed clear signs of tension, but his voice still tried to maintain authority. Your Honor, he declared loudly. But the urgency in his words was impossible to conceal. We have just gathered important evidence. These documents will prove that Mr. Musk violated regulations. Every detail is clearly recorded. Musk did not react immediately. He stood there, casually observing, as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. The judge frowned, picking up the stack of papers to examine them. He slowly flipped through each page, his sharp eyes scrutinizing. Mr. Musk, he looked up, his tone calm but serious. Do you have anything to say about these documents? Musk took a step forward. Neither hurried nor flustered. He looked directly at the judge, his voice steady but carrying an underlying sharpness. Your Honor, what's noteworthy is not the contents of these documents, but the timing of their appearance. He gently tapped his finger on the stack of papers. It's curious because this report was only drafted after the lawsuit had already begun. Whispers spread throughout the courtroom. Some people exchanged glances, while the prosecutor seemed visibly unsettled. Musk did not stop. He tilted his head, his gaze still calm, but his words carried weight. If this is truly crucial evidence, why has it only appeared now? This doesn't prove anything, except that the plaintiff's argument has serious gaps. The judge looked at the prosecutor, waiting for a reasonable explanation. But all that answered him was silence. The man who had once been so confident now stood there, lips tightly pressed together, unable to offer a justification. Musk gently placed his hand on the table, his voice steady but decisive. The law is not a place to make clumsy last-minute arguments. When the reasoning is no longer solid, people often try to cover it up, but the truth can't be hidden forever. The courtroom seemed to deflate. The prosecutor clenched his fists. But the confidence he had once had completely vanished. The judge pondered, his fingers lightly tapping on the wooden table, his gaze filled with thought. After a moment of silence, he sighed and spoke, his voice deep but firm. "Mr. Musk," he said, slowly but clearly, "I must admit that I did not fully appreciate you." The courtroom fell silent, so quiet that one could hear the breaths of those around them. "When this lawsuit started, I thought you had acted recklessly, even crossing the line, but after considering all the arguments presented today, I cannot hold on to that thought any longer." A smile briefly flickered across Musk's lips. He didn't need to say anything more. The truth had spoken for itself. The atmosphere in the courtroom was heavy, as though everyone was waiting for a sudden flash of light to break the tense silence. The prosecutor stood there, his face drained of color, his hands trembling, unable to hide his defeat. The judge, calm, looked down at the documents in front of him, then back at the arguing parties. "The accusations you have made are not only unsupported by strong evidence but are completely baseless. Your arguments, if not absurd, only make the case more ambiguous." These words struck the opposing lawyers like a blow to the chest, leaving them unable to respond. They knew they had lost, but there was no way to salvage it. Musk said nothing, simply standing there, silent as if he had been waiting for this moment for a long time. When everything naturally returned to its proper course, the judge slowly surveyed the room, then spoke, his voice resounding with certainty. "The court cannot continue with this lawsuit. Mr. Musk, you are free to go." These words exposed every effort of the plaintiff's side, and shock appeared on the face of their lawyer. He stammered, wanting to object but unable to utter a single word. Musk simply smiled gently, as if it were inevitable. He hadn't needed to rush because he knew the outcome had already been decided. As the courtroom began to empty, noise from outside filtered in. A swarm of reporters rushed in, cameras flashing continuously, microphones raised high in anticipation of an answer. "Mr. Musk, how does it feel to win?" a reporter eagerly asked. Musk, wearing dark glasses, cast a glance over the cameras, his mouth curling into a slight smile. "Simply that justice has not let us down." His answer quickly became the headline of numerous articles. Words like, "master of legal tactics," "the one who disrupted the system," spread across major newspapers. Not only did Musk win, but the entire legal system had to reconsider its old methods. A wave of change had begun, as lawyers slowly realized that they weren't always as invincible as they once thought. The judge, who had once looked down on Musk, now felt a sense of respect for him. He didn't just win in the courtroom, he made us reconsider everything we've been doing. But Musk didn't mind. To him, it was just another ordinary day. A new challenge awaited. Although the courtroom had become quiet, the air still held a sense of tension, as if the arguments had never really ended. The judge sat quietly, his hand playing with the pen, his eyes looking down at the unfinished notes. He had started this morning believing that he understood the situation better than anyone else in the room. But now, he realized that wisdom didn't only reside in those wearing the lawyer's robes. Elon Musk had not only won this trial, he had made the entire legal system face its deep-rooted flaws. The judge, who had once dismissed Musk, now couldn't help but admit that intelligence could come from people few would consider. With his innovative vision, Musk had brought the principles of technology and creativity into a field regarded as rigid and conservative. He had shown that to solve difficult problems, completely different approaches were necessary, ones that went beyond familiar frameworks. But the most important question remained unanswered. How many legal cases had been overlooked or unfairly imposed simply because those filing the lawsuits lacked the power to make a change? Although the verdict had been delivered, the questions Musk raised continued to echo. Just like technology, law too needed to evolve, adapting to the continuous changes in society. Musk had pointed out that when facing an outdated system, sharp intellect could be the driving force for change. Step by step, this lawsuit was not just a legal debate. It was a challenge to long-established structures that had never been questioned. If Elon Musk could find weaknesses in the legal process, how many other conditions, regulations, and rules are we following without ever asking questions? How many times in the past have people been forced to remain silent and endure simply because they didn't have the power to resist? What do you think about this? Should we change the legal system to keep up with the continuous advancements in technology and society? Or should we continue to cling to traditional values, to old rules that may no longer be relevant in today's world? Can systems that have existed for centuries continue to provide the fairness and effectiveness we expect? When the world around us is changing so rapidly, this question is not just a theoretical debate. It is a call to awaken to the necessity of a fresh perspective on the law. A perspective that is not just based on outdated regulations but also needs to meet the new demands and challenges of modern society. When technology can change our lives every day, can the legal system remain stagnant while everything else around us continues to change? Imagine a world where the law is flexible, capable of responding quickly to new issues, from artificial intelligence to unprecedented social shifts. Could we open our eyes to realize that a shift in how we approach justice is not just necessary but a prerequisite for maintaining fairness and progress? But at the same time, maintaining tradition is not something easily set aside. There are principles and values that have existed through generations, forming the foundation of stability and social order. So, can we find a balance between innovation and preserving those valuable principles? This discussion is not just about the law, but about the future of society, about how we view progress and stability. Can we leave behind a legal legacy that fits the new era? Or will we leave a worn-out system unable to keep pace with the rate of change? Surely, this is just the beginning of a deeper discussion, and the answer is not easy, but it is certainly worth thinking about and sharing.